I'm a bit nervous because Harsha asked me to come and share some jokes, the theme of which was supposed to be austerity, and and I looked over a lot of my jokes and couldn't really find that theme coming up. So what I've decided to do is take a lot of my jokes that people seem to love, and I've cut out all the punchlines. There's going to be a private show after this event. The tickets cost $9,000, but it's on a party boat. It's actually on one of the abandoned Coast Guard boats.
But really, austerity does affect all of us, right? Cuts to women's centers, cuts to healthcare, cuts to education, cuts to all of the social programs, cuts to housing subsidies. These are all austerity. And what we see happening with public spending is that it's going into things like prisons, the military, security defense forces, and corporate bailouts and bank bailouts. And so austerity does affect all of us, though of course it affects all of us differently. We're not all equally impacted by austerity. We're not equally impacted by the systems of capitalism or oppression or colonialism.
Where the logic of austerity meets the logic of neoliberalism. So it's not just this passive thing of money not trickling down. It's actually an active thing of kicking people down to the bottom of the pyramid and then creating a political economy around managing them, in particular a political economy that's favorable to certain political parties. So that's what connects things like this approach to EI that they had with private detention centers for refugees, with the temporary foreign worker program, different minimum wages for people of color, to what's happening in our prison system, where crime is at an all-time low, but the prison population is at an all-time high. It's increasingly made up of people of color and Indigenous people, particularly Indigenous women, whose rate of incarceration has increased by 80%. I wanted to bring that in tonight because while we're watching Baltimore, I think it's important to also remember what's happening here. So this is neoliberalism. It's part of how racism and colonialism manifest in our economy, and austerity is part of how it's happening in practice.
A time of reduced spending, generally enacted by the government. But where is this reduction happening? Is it happening at the higher levels of government? Is it happening in every area of the city and to all of the different classes and genders and nationalities and backgrounds? No, because of what in another way could be austerity. My Musqueam people have lost out on so much in this city that is born onto our land without our permission, without our consultation.
I think we all have an intuitive sense of what austerity represents in terms of privatization and deregulation, the omnibus legislation, the political repression, oppression of particularly the Harper government and the Clark government too, in that trend. And we all witness in our daily lives the devastating impacts it has on society in general, particularly women, Indigenous peoples, immigrants, those that are the most vulnerable.
Creating vulnerability and a climate of fear for the future, whether you're a university grad or low income for whatever reason, is then used to create those divisions, again, that have been described so eloquently, between generations, between different groups of workers, between social service agencies who are forced to compete for money to do their good work, for funding, between the culturally defined deserving and undeserving. Do we give to addicts? No, they're not deserving. Or how about poor moms who made bad choices? All of those definitions that are out there that divide us. And again, we're told there's only one pie, and if we're going to give to these guys, we're going to have to take from these people. And this narrative never encourages us to talk about abundance, about the bigger pie, and especially a bigger tax pie. Vulnerability is created through austerity policies that drive down wages, shred the social safety net, and we've heard again, gutting the employment insurance benefits and program, frozen welfare rates for decades, and then shifting funding for public service, or those common good services, from individuals. So we cut corporate tax and we say, you pay for your MSP, you pay for your post-secondary, you pay for your counseling service, your child care. It's all a commodity, just buy it.
When we talk about austerity, one of the things we're talking about really is the de-skilling of labor, and also workers being pitted against each other to lower standards. And so in British Columbia, this was happening quite a bit in the late 19th and early 20th century. And one of the biggest ways it was done was through racism. And so we saw the exploitation of migrant workers, basically a lot of Chinese workers actually, and First Nations workers. And so the response to the labor movement was very different. On one hand, you had some of the trade unions came out and actually campaigned on no foreigners allowed, and had racist marches and demonstrations. But then you had other labor unions that went out and aggressively organized migrant workers, aggressively organized First Nations workers, especially here on the docks in Vancouver. There was an entire First Nations local of the IWW, and aggressively empowered those groups through those union structures to be able to fight for their own rights.
Canada's strategy or pseudo-strategy to bring women from the global south to do caregiving, nannying, and all different healthcare aid positions in Canada. And really, it's in the absence of genuine strategies for childcare, universal childcare and healthcare for the elderly and differently abled. So the LCP is an atrocious program that violates human rights and exploits women. We condemn it as modern slavery, as racist, unjust, and as anti-woman.
The nature of our work is living and working in our employer's home. And we are so vulnerable, very vulnerable, doing the dirty, difficult, and dangerous job. I said dirty because of the political system.
When we talk about austerity, we often think about shrinking budgets. But actually, I think what's more important to consider is that what we're being asked to do is to shrink our hearts as a society. We're being asked to place stricter limitations on the boundaries of our compassion and how far we're willing to let that extend.
Oh, oh, oh. It's up, guy.